Hello friends, what took you so long? Come on, we've got Flesh and Blood to learn! Hi and welcome to Tabletop Gaming, my name is Charlie and we are the publishers of a monthly magazine on all things trading card games, board games, card games, all the fun stuff in between. And we are no strangers to Flesh and Blood, and that is why today I'm going to give you the overview on how you're going to play Flesh and Blood. Now, there are plenty of really incredible guides on the Flesh and Blood website that I would absolutely recommend that you check out. They will give you a little bit more detail on the nitty-gritty of what you need to do. I do think when you first start to play games like this, you need a little bit more of a, this is roughly what we kind of need to know, rather than a huge brain dump. So let's get into the stuff that I think you need to know in order to play, and then when you go and get your deck, you will find out how easy it is to take it from there. Trust me. So let's begin. My biggest advice is don't make things too complicated. Do not go out and buy a massive booster pack as your first thing to set up a deck when you don't necessarily know why it is that you're doing what you're doing. Grab something like these. So these are First Strike decks, so known because they said First Strike on the side. And what these are beginner-friendly, pre-constructed decks, which means you grab one of these, your pal grabs one of these, and together you can play a game of Flesh and Blood. Just as simple as that. Now, these give you a 40 card deck plus your hero and equipment, but I will explain that in a moment, what that means and why that's important. But if you get used to this format, it's great fun, and it's not too much of a step up to then go into your standard sort of constructed formats and stuff. And just in case that meant absolutely nothing, basically every single one of these will have the same pack inside, so that everyone is playing on the same level playing field. It gives you enough knowledge to be able to then go out and buy those booster packs that I said to hold off for a moment on, and then you can build your own deck. Those are your constructed decks that you may take into like big competitions and things, which Flesh and Blood is very good at. They've got some great competitions on the horizon, big world championships, big prizes. It's all very exciting, but you can start literally from these tiny little decks here. Moving on, Terra is an Earth Guardian deck, so they all have different flavours, and this flavour is Earth Guardian, and basically he's quite like Hulk smash style. He is big hits, coming in swinging, and causing you to do things like discarding cards out of your hand. So he can be tricky to defend against, but he's sort of big and moving, and exactly how you see in the thing. On the flip side, if you are more of a zappy player, which is much more my play style on things like this, you want to get in lots of little hits and keep going, then you're looking for something like Aurora. So this is a lightning runeblade deck, and of the two, this is my personal favourite, but that is only because this is the style that I play in. So if you have played other trading card games and you know that there is a specific way you like to play, decide on which one between you and your friends you're going to play. Easy as that. Now, the big thing with Flesh and Blood is how it plays, and actually it's a little bit different to some other trading card games, the big ones at least, because you have your hero and your entire setup and deck revolves around that hero. So there's no kind of teamwork, as it were, as you get in quite a lot of other trading card games. This is one hero versus one hero. And because it's my favourite, we're going to primarily focus on learning through Aurora. Now, Aurora, not only is this card absolutely beautiful, but she is our character for this. And we're going to use her to explain sort of the anatomy. So basically, when you're fighting, you're going to be trying to get the other hero down to 0 health, right? It makes sense. And the way we know how much health they should have is here. So in this case, we have 20 health from Aurora. Fab. We need to keep an eye on that so when we take damage, we're not getting too low. Now, the other thing on Aurora is that we also have this little marker here. This tells us how many cards it is that we need to draw up to our hand. Now, they say in all of these and stuff you need to know, that's not a limit. There might be times when you can have more, but it is worth knowing because that's at the end how many you draw up to as a standard. And that you need to keep an eye on. Now, we'll pop her in the middle. My favourite thing about Flesh and Blood is how much of it actually just makes sense, right? So when you are providing weapons to your heroes to start off with, you just need to consider that you're going to hold the weapons in your hands, and you can have one two-handed one because you've got no hands left after that, or two one-handed ones. It makes sense, right? And the way you know about that is the cards themselves. So all of them tell you at the bottom what sort of card it is that they are. So in this case, we are a lightning runeblade weapon, sword, 2H. 2H means two-handed, so I can only have one of those out. That makes sense. I have two hands. I can only do one weapon. Perfect. I will pop that down next to Aurora. Right, so let's dive into actually playing. So first round, we've got our hero in place, we've got their weapon in place. We're going to ignore the rest for now, remember, and what we're going to do is we're going to pull 4 cards from our deck. Now, the reason we're pulling 4 cards specifically is because if you take a look at Aurora, she has here a number 4. That tells us how many we're going to draw up to each turn. So that changes depending on your character. This time around, Aurora, she's given us 4. So we have 4 cards. Now, we may want to play cards, and to do so we need some resources, and you'll know that there are different resources you can pick up, different amounts of resources you can pick up to play your cards with. So first of all, we need to know how much stuff costs and how we get to pay it. So Heaven's Claws, for example, is a really interesting one. Happens quite a lot is that there are some differences. Although these cards look very, very similar, they are actually in fact different. So you see the red bar across the top versus the yellow bar. We also have a blue bar in the game, and that tells us the power level. Don't worry about remembering the colour though, it's just helpful for seeing it on site. The reason I say that is because these little tokens in the corner tell you how many resources you can gain by pitching these cards. Now, pitching is sort of a way of discarding, I guess, to put them into your pitch area that gives you resources you can play elsewhere. So if, for example, we were to pitch Heaven's Claws, we would get 2 resources for doing so, which would then allow us to play something of our others. Now, in this example, the things we've drawn don't have high costs, which is super useful in general, but not perhaps the best example. But we can play Heaven's Claws for 1, which has an attack of 5 or can defend for 3. That's important to remember because that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to be attacking our fellow opponent and we want to be defending against their attacks, leaving us nice and healthy and them pretty battered and bruised. Now, the nice thing also about having Heaven's Claws in our first hand is that this has a lightning symbol, which is part of the power-up abilities and cool extras you get from having a deck such as these first strike ones. You can do more when you see these symbols arise. So if we were to look at Starfall, once per turn action, we can pay 1 resource to attack. But if we've played a lightning card this turn, namely one of these, the attack gets +1 and gets go again. Now, as you might expect, go again means you can go again. It gives you back, so basically you have an action point each round, and go again means that you get that action point back to go again. Great, see how it goes? This deck uses it quite a lot, the other one not as much, but it means that you have the opportunities to get in lots of little attacks rather than one big one. And I spoke too soon because of course Photon Rush, which is also in our deck, has the same. If you've played a lightning card this turn, this gets go again. Now, just a couple of things to be aware of. You can't pitch for no reason. If you're going to put cards down, you're using them to pay for something. There's no point just placing them for the sake of placing them. So in this case, what I've actually decided to do is I'm going to use those 2 resources I've got for my Heaven's Claws. I'm going to play that out, and that is going to form an attack for 5. Now, my fellow player needs to then defend that for 5, or they take damage to their hero. Nice and simple. Once they've made their choices, once we played that turn, if we have any reactions, we can play those, any defense reactions, they come back and forward, and what that does is that creates this really neat back and forwards between us. So I attack, you defend, I attack, you defend, and let's see where we end up. It means that there's also very little downtime because we're constantly both playing and keeping an eye on what's going on. And because those resources don't refresh, which is actually quite important, you are trying to do as much as you can. But you need to be strategic because you maybe need to figure out why I've pitched with quite a high value if it doesn't look like there's something I'm going to do. Because, oh wait, if I've got resources left over, there are other things that I can choose to use. So in this case, I could have used Starfall, for example, whereby once per turn action, I can attack with it. And if I've played a lightning card this turn, it gets +1 and gets go again. So I can go again. So now it becomes quite methodical, and a lot of this combat chain is a really good example, and chain in general is a really fantastic descriptor of what's happening because you're building up these moments of constant little things happening. You're building a chain. This happened, so this happened. It's like that really epic moment when you do really good combos and you're just really proud that something has come out of it and created something very powerful. That's what you're trying to do, and that's what your fellow player is trying to disrupt, or you're trying to disrupt of theirs. It gets quite cool. At the end of the turn, if I've played sort of everything I want to, then potentially I can put something into my arsenal, or I can keep some stuff for later. So in this case, I will just show you the idea of putting something into your arsenal, which is basically keeping it for another round. The reason you might want to do so is both both because when you draw up to your hand limit and it keeps one hidden away for you, so technically you get an extra. But the other one is you get some bonuses for doing that on some cards too. So in this case, for Lightning Surge, if this was played from an arsenal, it means that you get go again. So I can pop that down, and in a later round I can benefit from it too. Then we do a bit of a reset and we go again. Now, if the shoe is on the other foot and you're looking to defend against attack that's been made, you need to take a look at the shields on your cards. So these can stack. So I could potentially sacrifice my cards to protect myself for a value in these of up to 8. So I could prevent up to 8 damage at the moment based on these things. Now, remember there are things like your equipment that you could use at a later date, but just do your shields to begin with. So all you would do is play these down, mitigate some or a bit of the damage, and hope for the best. Now, the impressive thing with Flesh and Blood, and these decks especially, because they play so differently, the game can change very, very quickly. So it might be that actually you've defended quite a few, but that doesn't leave you with much in your hand to do anything else. But that's worth it because the hand wasn't great, so you weren't going to be able to do much next turn anyway. Alternatively, it might be better to say, actually, these cards are more important to me. I can take some of that damage. That's okay. And I'm going to actually use that to then come back swinging later. Whenever you play or watch a game of Flesh and Blood, and I would recommend watching before you start playing as well, because it gives you a good idea of what's happening and what people are looking for, is that it's so fluid. It changes very, very quickly. Why this is happening starts to make sense. So it may have taken one big hit from somebody else with a lot of resources to cause you some damage, but you've taken that damage, but you've got a hand of cards that you can play out immediately because you can just keep using go again to get there. Once a player hits 0, it means that they are out, they have lost. Hopefully you are victorious, but you know, who knows, fingers crossed for you, but we'll see. And genuinely, that is all you need to know to start. The very first couple of rounds, you'll play those through and then you'll start looking at your cards and going, oh, interesting, that lets me do that. If I take this from here, if I move that from there, if I do this alongside a lightning card, actually I'm going to start stacking more abilities and more things that I can do. It takes a little bit of time to get your head round, as with all games, but once you do, what you've learnt from this is then applicable to something else. So if you're playing with your friend against the Aurora deck using the Terra deck, and you want to swap over, you will have new gameplay, but you'll find that you can do it straight away from what you've learnt from the other, which is really important. So get playing, get down to your local store, give it a try. I would recommend these First Strike decks. I think they're a fantastic way to learn to play. And let us know in the comments if you have any questions. But good luck, keep an eye on your turns, make sure you know what's going on and where. First couple, make sure you have a lot of communication. Open communication with your fellow player is a great idea because you can check on each other, answer any questions and see how you go. And don't be afraid to just jump in, see what happens.